Unfortunately, this video ended on a bit of a low note. Luckily, next time on Stiles Series Synopsis, we'll be taking a look at one of the brightest, most colorful, and sickeningly adorable games in the entire series to compensate. Final Fantasy III. Well, I at least got part of that right. First things first, I must admit that this impromptu review of World of Final Fantasy has thrown off my entire review schedule for the rest of this year. I'd perfectly planned out each review I was going to be doing until 2017, and now I'm sort of just going with the flow of things. With Final Fantasy 15 right around the corner and a couple of other pre-planned videos already in the works, I don't know when I'll be getting to Stiles Series Synopsis of Final Fantasy 3. There will still be a steady flow of content, and Final Fantasy will still be at the forefront of that, but all of the new releases are just more topical, and I feel I need to take advantage of that while they are still as relevant as they are. I'm genuinely sorry if that disappoints some of you, but hopefully all the other videos will be able to tide you over. That being said, World of Final Fantasy. Yeah. I had no idea what I was expecting when I purchased World of Final Fantasy, and yet I'm still bewildered. There are aspects of the game that I love, and other aspects that actually piss me off, and not in the comedic sense. From the very beginning of my reviewing career, I promised I'd never fall back on the angry reviewer shtick because frankly I feel it's lazy and played out. So what you will eventually see in this review is genuine outrage. Because of that and how fickle the internet can be, I urge you to sit through the entire review before responding or clicking away from the video. For fear of startling away the impatient viewers here, I will preface this video with my own personal spoiler. Despite my genuine hate for certain aspects of this game, it is still one that I recommend. So, let's begin with the obvious. This game is adorable, perhaps even too much for some gamers. The most obvious and apt comparison is to Kingdom Hearts, though the fact that this game is a consistent world means that they are able to keep a consistent presentation as well, which is a bonus. The characters are very much Tetsuya Nomura inspired, which I could give or take, but the miniature versions of series famous creatures and summons hit all the right notes for me. Just to show how strongly this game intends to force its cuteness on you, I'd like to point out that one of the game's main gimmicks revolves around switching your humanoid characters into chibi versions of themselves, so that they can blend into the world that they are exploring, which is an almost completely unused gimmick now that I think about it. One part of the presentation that I feel most players won't have the stomach for is the abundant amounts of hokey dialogue. For one example, one of the characters puts the word "the" into inappropriate parts of the sentence to try and be cute.
How could you forget? You used to command a whole legion of them! You were masters of them! Powerful living illusions known as mirages!
On top of that, the leading male's favorite curse word is honk.
Right here!
Who the honk put this thing on my head? Jelly sandwich! Holy mom!
Yeah, it's that kind of game, everybody. The writing is about on par with your average Saturday morning cartoon from the 1970s, which is to say, not very good. It honestly didn't bother me as much as I thought it would, and there were actually a few moments where the game got a chuckle out of me despite myself, but just know going in that this game is oozing with cheese. Similarly, the game's voiceovers will be equally contentious. As a day one purchaser, I was given the Japanese voiceover DLC for free, so I listened to the game in both Japanese and English, and found them both equally serviceable at their best moments and annoying at their worst. One thing I did find interesting while playing in both languages, however, is that neither language is properly lip-synced, which means that in this case, it was not just a translation issue. I got over it pretty quickly, but decided to continue my playthrough in English since neither setting was lending any particular authenticity to the experience. One part of the presentation I do love, however, is the world design, which is where I feel the charming atmosphere is put to the greatest use. There are a lot of standard, some would even argue cliché, areas in the game. Fire caves, snowy mountains, plains, all of which use their size, simplicity, and color to convey an extremely comforting and polished throwback to RPGs of old, while still bringing them to the modern era in such a way that I can't remember a single other game doing it this well. Seriously, if you guys know of any recent games that nail this aspect of their design, let me know as I want to play them. Last but not least is the music, which is mostly good with the exception of a few bastardized versions of classic Final Fantasy tunes. All of the original compositions fit the game incredibly well, and while I don't see myself listening to any of the tracks outside of the game, I still feel they help bolster the atmosphere. Those familiar with the musical stylings of Masashi Hamauzu, the lead composer for Final Fantasy XIII, should feel right at home here, though I honestly think that the music composed for this game is both more fitting for the subject matter, as well as being a better standalone soundtrack overall. By contrast, By far the worst element of World of Final Fantasy is its story. It's not just subpar, it is god-awful and fails not just in terms of its pathetic attempts at fan service, but as a standalone story as well. I won't lie, the story actually pisses me off because of how insultingly abysmal it is. First and foremost, the entirety of the plot is based around the two main characters' amnesia, and as everyone knows, the easiest way to show your lack of skill as a writer is to rely on amnesia as a plot device. The story's pacing is also dreadful in that nothing happens except at the very beginning of the game and in the last quarter of it. The vast majority of this game's plot is entirely filler, and the only reminders you have at all that there is a central story is when the main girl says, "Oh yeah, I just got a random memory back for absolutely no fucking reason." Don't forget, players, we have amnesia. It was fucking painful. Even worse is that the supposed grand mystery is so glaringly evident that I knew within the first 2 hours exactly how the story was going to play out. Oh, but don't worry. If you're lucky enough to be ignorant of the mystery presented to you, that ignorance won't last long. As the story progresses, the game beats you over the head with a mallet of foreshadowing so fucking massive that it's nearly impossible not to see what's coming. If I'm being honest, this wasn't even the part of the story that truly bothered me. I wasn't expecting some grand tale from a Final Fantasy spin-off, alright? Both because of what Square normally gives us in these titles, and also because I knew this game was aimed at a younger audience. Besides, from the trailers alone, you can see how heavily the game relies on its fan service of older FF characters showing up throughout the game as a means of keeping longtime fans interested. Which would be great if the fan service wasn't a complete slap in the face to every long-term Final Fantasy fan. Let's start pointing out examples, shall we? In what fucking way does this Midgar monstrosity represent Nibelheim? When I go inside, it doesn't look like fucking either. If anything, it looks like Calm. Saronia, from Final Fantasy III, for those not in the know, is neither a port town, nor does it rest in a snowy climate. Have developers even fucking played a Final Fantasy game before? It's like they read a wiki and built the game from that. Let's see. Everyone knows that iconic city from Final Fantasy VII. What was it called again? Let's look up Tifa's hometown. That should tell us. Easily the most ridiculous example of this comes about 3/4 of the way through the game. Why the hell does Figaro Castle from Final Fantasy VI have a dungeon that contains the prison from Final Fantasy VIII, with Mako reactors from Final Fantasy VII beneath them? There is no rhyme or reason to it. No overarching intelligent design, just a mishmash of, oh,
jelly sandwich!
We've gone 10 minutes without a reference. We better fix that. Not even the characters themselves go unscathed. Rydia from Final Fantasy IV is afraid of fire as an adult, showing a great deal of weakness while her original incarnation got over this phobia as a child. And that, while irritating, is still not nearly as insulting as how Refia's character was handled in this title, being represented as a soft-spoken and sweet, almost shy woman, when in Final Fantasy III she's a smart-mouthed and defiant—
Holy mama!
Nearly the antithesis of what is shown here. The game makes references to almost every main entry in this series, but fails to have references to Final Fantasy II, 12, or 14, which I was originally disappointed about until I saw how
jelly sandwich
was handled. I don't know if this is just another example of the writers not caring, or if they were purposefully omitted because of the mixed reception of those titles. But wait a minute, that can't be the case either, because 2 of the cameo characters aren't even from the main series. Shulk from Dirge of Cerberus, which was reviled, and Charlotta from Crystal Chronicles Echoes of Time, which hardly anyone has played. I mean, don't get me wrong, as a Final Fantasy fan, I think it's cool that their existence was even acknowledged, given how often the games are overlooked by both fans and the parent company, but that's all it comes down to, isn't it? Pointing out that the games existed. If we take into account that this game was developed by Tosei, not anyone at Square, according to the game's own credits, it sheds a lot of light on why this likely occurred, though it also shows just how little Square gives a fuck about their properties by letting these issues slide. Yes, I know a lot of you probably think I'm just getting butthurt over fanboy technicalities, and I should just let things go. And you know what? I completely agree with you if the game hadn't been sold on its fucking fan service. Take one look at the marketing, you'll see that it's clearly pandering to longtime fans, so all these inaccuracies are just mind-boggling. Even if I ignore the series' previous history, the inclusion of these characters is completely pointless. They are barely plot relevant. In fact, they are mostly just MacGuffins so that the player can have Final Fantasy characters as summons. The importance of these characters' stories never boils down to anything more than, oh, I have to go to this town, so let's travel together. Yay, we made it! Bye, I'm never going to see you again! Or if you're really lucky, yay! I'll be back for the final showdown! I know that somebody watching this is going to point out the bonus missions the game provides that gives all of the FF characters their own sort of side stories, but at the time most of these became available, I was completely uninterested. Not to mention these side stories often have nothing to do with the main game, which makes them completely and utterly pointless. Unless you're trying to get the game's real ending. Yes, yet another failing on top of everything presented previously. The game gives you a fake out ending and then tells you, well, if you want the real story, you better go do every side quest. Look guys, in some games this works, alright? Nier is one of my favorite games ever. To get its real story fully fleshed out, you have to complete the second half of the game 4 times. The difference is, Nier earned that right by being complex and riveting. Rule the Final Fantasy with its paper-thin, Saturday morning shonen
jelly sandwich
didn't come anywhere close to being good enough of a story to demand that of me. Or any other player for that matter. But guess what? I did the quests anyway, and the ending still isn't fucking worth it. This frustrates me mostly because I don't know what the intention was. This game was clearly designed for kids based on the aesthetic and dialogue, but what young child is going to know who even half of these older Final Fantasy characters are in the first place? How many children are going to get the terrible first ending and think to reload the game for it to then be revealed that there's a better ending in store if they replay a large portion of the game? It creates a scenario where neither audience would be reasonably satisfied, and I'm just flustered beyond belief at how anyone could think this was a good idea. I really can't stress enough how awful this game's story is. I know I keep repeating it, but it is just that frustrating to me. It's not just technically flawed, cliched, and boring, it is infuriatingly insulting because of how slapped together it is. You can almost see the bits of mutilated duct tape holding the thing together because of what a slapdash, non-cohesive whole it is. And no, I don't accept the
jelly sandwich
argument that of course it's bad, it's a kid's game. What did you expect? Ni no Kuni was meant for kids, and its story is much, much better than anything this game could ever even hope to be. I'll admit, I've played games with worse stories. Hell, even games in the same series with worse plots. But the difference here is that this story is bad not just on its own merits, but in so many ways that Square may as well have been flipping us the bird. I guess that's the only true basis I have for the rage this game brought out of me. I'm just gonna cut myself off now before this drags on for another 10 minutes, but I can't believe so many other reviewers that claim to be Final Fantasy fans just looked over all this. Anyway, let's get back to the positive, because there actually is positive to this game. I feel it is improper to discuss this game's gameplay without taking a look at Square's new development tactic as of the last couple of years. Instead of developing their own games with their own ideas, they've taken to copy and pasting the game design of other popular franchises for use in their own. No, don't pretend this isn't happening. This year alone, we've seen the likes of Dragon Quest Builders, which is attempting to cash in on the popularity of Minecraft, Final Fantasy Explorers, also known as Baby's First Monster Hunter, and hell, even the flagship Final Fantasy 15 has more in common with Dragon's Dogma and the Tales games than it does anything in its own series. If we go back further than that, we can see even more examples of this, even on the Eidos side of things. For example, yes, Uncharted was inspired by Tomb Raider, but once Uncharted was a success, you can't pretend that Tomb Raider didn't borrow just as many ideas back. Despite reeking of desperation, I don't necessarily see this business tactic as a bad one as long as the games continue to be of high quality. And so far, Square's batting average has actually been pretty high when it comes to this. Which brings us to World of Final Fantasy, Square's response to the Pokemon resurgence and the popularity of Yokai Watch. Based on the gameplay alone, this may actually be the best of the copycat games, so much so that I'd argue it's better than the games it's trying to emulate, though considering I'm not a large fan of the Pokemon franchise, that statement will hold less weight for some people than others. Let's begin with the combat. While the combat is ATB, I'd say it's far more akin to Child of Light than it is early Final Fantasy games. In fact, it all but steals the combat system wholesale, which once again points to my earlier statement about copy and paste tactics as of late. There's a meter on the screen that shows the placement of every character and what order their turn will come in, and attacking enemies with their weakness or getting a critical hit can cause a short staggering, which can stall their turn temporarily. This isn't a mechanic that's all that fleshed out, and I never really needed to pay attention to it in my playthrough, but it is something that was technically implemented, so I felt it was worth mentioning. Beyond that, the combat is pretty standard fare, focusing on monster catching, in this game called Mirages, and both exploiting and covering for the weaknesses of creatures on both sides. This is where the game's main gimmick comes into place. The use of stacks, a mechanic that seemed incredibly silly to me until I saw how much depth there actually was to the system. Your party consists of 4 creatures and your 2 main party members at any given time, the catch being that while unstacked they are all but useless. The game says that there are strategic benefits to having your characters unstacked, but with the exception of doing less damage and to helping catching mirages, I found exactly 0 benefits to this half of the system, which was disappointing. On the other hand, this does create a situation where being unstacked worked as a bit of a debuff both for you and enemy stacks, which is interesting, but it's very underutilized as a mechanic. Anyway, dismissing that aside, your stacks have a very large effect on the gameplay. Strengths and weaknesses for all the creatures in a stack combine, meaning that you can make enemies whom are usually weak to an element immune, or even boost the strength of certain elements for combat purposes. On top of that, you gain the bonus of spell stacking. For example, if you have 2 creatures in a stack that know fire, then as a stack they'll be able to cast Fire. The customization doesn't stop there, however. Whenever you capture a Mirage, they'll be reset to level 1, which would normally sound like a terrible idea, but the game intelligently works around this decision by allowing you to carry Mirages with you that aren't in your combat party, so that they can gain experience quickly and catch up, allowing you to experiment with your setup frequently without having to waste a lot of time grinding. This level 1 reset also affords you the opportunity to level up the creatures as you see fit. Every creature in the game has a progression board very similar to the sphere grid, that allows you to choose what abilities or stat gains you will get at what points, as well as offering you the ability to evolve and devolve your Mirages nearly at will. So you never have to fear losing a powerful element of your stack because your creature has changed sizes due to evolution. It was all brilliantly well considered and implemented with an attention to detail you very rarely see in games, and I cannot applaud it enough for this. I'd also like to add that one of my favorite parts about this game was how the requirements for catching certain Mirages would change depending on what you were fighting. Yes, a lot of them still just require you to lower their HP to a critical range, but there are also a lot that require you to get a critical hit on them, or use a certain element, or inflict certain status ailments. This creates a system that encourages you to examine your targets thoroughly and fight more strategically, as well as offering a unique challenge. Now, if I were to make any complaint about the combat system, it would be how slowly the ATB bar fills, even on its fastest setting. It seems the developers realize this issue as well because they implemented a speed up button that can be used to increase the game's speed. I'm not ashamed to admit that I held down this button in almost every single battle, and I feel the game would have been far less enjoyable without it. This is a difficult thing for me to praise, however, because ideally the game wouldn't have needed this fix in the first place if the speed had been better optimized, which would have left the speed up button a tool for grinding only and not for every battle I came across. This is all nitpicking, but for the sake of completeness, it needed to be here. My only other disappointment with the gameplay is that the highly marketed gimmick of being able to change your size at will doesn't affect the game at all except for when it comes to stack construction. I don't remember there being a single dungeon or puzzle that requires the switching of size to progress, which is an enormously missed opportunity. In fact, the game says it gives you the ability to blend into the world of Grimoire, but even that doesn't matter as NPCs recognize that you are a giant and don't really care. There were a couple of times where I would receive slightly different dialogue from unimportant NPCs based on what character I was controlling as my party leader or what size I was, but nothing else ever changed. And most of the story segments and cutscenes automatically force you into whatever size fits the story's needs anyway, which leaves it as a completely pointless addition except for when it comes to your stack formation, which I've already discussed. The one thing I feel this game does superbly well that I've seen close to no one talk about is its map design. Well, for the most part. The game does fall back on its Final Fantasy XIII roots a couple times by giving a couple hallways which were frustratingly tedious, but the two dungeons in question at least made canonical sense and were the exception rather than the rule, so I'll begrudgingly give them a pass. Every dungeon has some sort of bonus area that you can get to either by using your creature map talents or by defeating a high-level monster that may be blocking your way, and the game graciously gives you the decision of exploring these regions immediately or coming back at your leisure thanks to the game's quick travel system. Several of the areas also contain simple but entertaining gimmicks. For example, the underwater temple lets you walk vertically, while the train graveyard has you pulling several levers to raise and lower train cars that may be blocking your path. Again, I'd like to stress that none of these mechanics are at all complex, remaining easy enough to grasp for children to get through these sections, but they added a level of involvement that left me feeling far more entertained than the majority of point A to B dungeons do. It also acts as a sad reminder of how far JRPGs have fallen in this regard in the past 10 or so years. Though it may seem contradictory, because this video contains my most temper-fueled rant to date, I really did enjoy this game, so much so that I want to play it through a second time. I firmly stand by my opinion that the story is horrendous, and if World of Final Fantasy's gameplay was also mediocre, I would not be able to recommend this game to anyone. Fortunately, the story plays a fairly small role in this title to begin with. Plus, the game gives you the option to skip it all, so you can just get back to the decent combat, addicting customization, and phenomenal dungeon design. If this game sounds fun to you, but I made you wary because of my comments about the story, I suggest trying the game anyway, but I do hope that my warning will at least alleviate some of the agony you may have otherwise experienced. On the other hand, if the story issues don't sound like they will bother you, then I insist you make this purchase, as I doubt you will be disappointed. And there we have it! My thoughts on World of Final Fantasy. It was an interesting video to work on, to say the least, but hey, it was fun to play and review something close to release for once. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're interested in watching more of my content, you can check out my last Stiles series synopsis video on Final Fantasy II, or you can check out my Halloween review of Catherine. I also just started a podcast, which I have at least one episode up by now, called Shooting This Shit with Stiles. If you are a mature watcher over the age of 18, I highly suggest you check that out. It's on the visual novel Gatawa Shoujo. I'm not sure what video I'll be bringing you next time, as I have several videos in the works, and it will really just depend on if I can get through my current game fast enough or not. I do work retail after all, and this is the holiday season, which makes things more difficult. Anyway, I'll see you all next time. Take care. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Have a good day!